So we've had two practice debates, and we've had some exercises. And in all of those, you have been making arguments, right? But none of you asked, hey, what's an argument? Right? We just said, go make arguments. You know? And for the most part, you're doing a really good job of doing that, right? But this session is really to kind of explain what an argument is and maybe what it's not. And then by knowing what it is, maybe you can make your arguments stronger for future debates. Okay? Make sense? That's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about arguments. So, what do you think an argument is? Don't look at the notes.
I can just show some opposite statements from the government's statement.
Okay, so a response. Yeah, a response? Okay, that's good. What else? Someone else? Just yell it out, whatever you think it might mean. Okay, your opinion. What else?
Some negative effects about some bad effect about the government.
Okay, a fact, right? Yeah, I mean, both government and opposition make arguments, right? So you don't need to say a fact that the government makes, right? Just maybe a fact, okay? That's good. What else? All right, a response, an opinion, a fact. Does it have to make sense? Yeah? Maybe? Okay, so how about a reason? Maybe? All right, so yeah, I mean, you have the general idea, okay? But I want to talk to you about what an argument actually is and how it's structured so that you can make even better arguments, all right? So, an argument is not this. An argument is not an opinion. Everyone has an opinion. But an opinion is not supported. Opinion is just a preference. Like if I say, I hate sushi. Okay, that's my opinion, right? There are a lot of people who love sushi. That's not a right or wrong answer, right? It's just, that's my preference. I don't like it, so I don't eat it, okay? But if I said, sushi is damaging to one's health, okay, that by itself is still an opinion. But you're going to come back and you're going to ask me a question, aren't you? If I say sushi is bad for your health, you're going to ask me a question, aren't you? What is that question going to be?
Why do you think that?
Why? Yes, why? In debate, you should always ask yourself, not others necessarily. I mean, you can ask others at certain points, but in debate, you should always ask yourself two questions. You should always ask the why question, or maybe the how, and then so what? And I'll talk more about that in a minute. But yeah, the why question. Many people make arguments, but then they don't support those arguments. So they don't answer the why question. Okay? And all arguments need to answer the why question. So why is that true? Why does that happen? And so we might say, you begin with an assertion. Sometimes we call this a claim or a contention. but it's really your position or your point. Okay, those are all kind of synonyms. And we start there. So I might start with, sushi is damaging to a person's health. That's my assertion, my claim, my contention, my position, or my point. All right? Now, you're going to come back and ask me why, right? So I have to come up with a reason. All right? A reason that it kind of explains why I think it's damaging to one's health. I can't really think of a reason by itself. So in this case, I probably also need some evidence, like a fact. All right? So if I have some evidence that says that 30% of the time that sushi is prepared, the raw fish has harmful bacteria in it. Right? So 30% has bad bacteria. And since 30% of the raw fish in sushi has bad bacteria in it, my reason now is we should not eat it because it has harmful bacteria. Therefore, which supports my claim that sushi is bad for the individual who's eating it. Okay? So you begin with an assertion, but you support it with reasons and evidence. Now, not all arguments have to have evidence. Some arguments you just need a reason. Okay? So, for example, on the basic income debate, someone might say, if people receive a paycheck every month, then they lack the motivation to go to work because you don't need to go to work if you're receiving an income anyway, right? Receiving money without working, that sounds pretty sweet, right? I'm going to sit at home and play video games. Okay? So you don't necessarily need evidence for that. That's just a reasonable, logical kind of an argument. Now, if you had evidence, that would make it even stronger, right? Like in India, or actually, let's not use the Indian example. In Finland, they have a form of basic income, and in Finland, studies have proven that more people now stay at home than they did before the basic income policy was passed, right? So having that evidence strengthens the argument. But you could make that argument without the evidence, right? Now, the more contentious or the more controversial the issue or the argument, the more demand there is for evidence. Okay? So the more controversial or contentious the issue, the more you will need to probably read evidence or have some kind of fact or quote or something to back it up. Because if something's really contentious, then a reason by itself is not going to be sufficient because you're going to have a strong reason, I'm going to have a strong reason. What's a judge supposed to do? Well, a judge was probably going to prefer the argument that has the most support behind it. So you should have evidence, right? So if I say that Donald Trump is great for the United States, that's a highly controversial argument, right? There are a lot of people who say the opposite. Donald Trump is terrible for the United States. Well, I would probably need to provide some sort of evidence, like an example maybe, right? He's good for the United States because he's standing up for American interests. Okay? So that makes my argument slightly stronger, right? Because I have some evidence. Yeah, so in any case, you get the idea, right? So if you look at it in these terms, you see that acronym here, ARE, is a nice way of remembering this mathematical formula, right? So an assertion is reasoning plus evidence. Okay? Simple little mathematical formula. Reasoning plus evidence equals an assertion. Make sense? Okay. Now, there's also something else that's not in your handouts that I want to discuss. And I think it's particularly important for parliamentary debate, because these are very common in parliamentary debate. How many of you have heard of this really old Greek guy named Aristotle? You ever heard of Aristotle? Maybe? Emma, have you heard of Aristotle? No? Okay. Aristotle. He wrote a book called On Rhetoric. And the book on rhetoric is, like this, and he talks about arguments in this book. He talks about what is persuasive. So he talks about things like ethos, pathos, logos. I don't know if you've heard of those before, but ethos is like a speaker's credibility. We get the word ethical from ethos. Pathos is the emotional appeals we would use. We get words like sympathy and empathy or pathetic from pathos. And then the last one is logos, which is reasoned support. We get the word logic from it. Okay? So ethos, pathos, logos. And Aristotle said that each one of these appeals, ethos, pathos, logos, can be used to persuade people. Right? So I walk in the room, you've never met me before, but Professor Inouye introduces me as Dr. Zompetti, a professor from a university in the United States who's been to 56 countries and has taught debate all over the world. I've written several books on argumentation, published many articles on argumentation, and he is going to be speaking to you about debate and argumentation. Does that make me sound credible? Hopefully? Right? Okay. So if I say something like, if I say, hey, you know what? Not all arguments need evidence. Are you going to believe me? Chances are, right? You're going to believe me. Now, if I came in here and I said, Hondas are a much better car than Toyotas, are you going to believe me? Why? No reason? But I'm an expert. I'm a professor. I just told you. I've written books, I've published articles, I'm a full professor with tenure at an pretty prestigious American university. Why wouldn't you believe me that Hondas are better than Toyotas?
It's not. You're not professional about cars.
Exactly. I'm an expert, but not in cars, right? I'm an expert in something else, okay? So just because someone has little letters after their name, like PhD, right, doesn't mean that they know everything, right? I'm just an expert in my own little area. So yeah, that's good. But that's what ethos is. And so Aristotle said, well, yeah, that's persuasive, right? I could come in, I could say something about argument, and you are likely to believe me because I have ethos in that area. Pathos is an appeal to emotion. There are all kinds of different emotions, right? And we can use any of them in an argument. Probably the most common is the appeal to fear, the fear appeal. Like just earlier today, before lunch, we said, be back at a certain time because we have a practice debate, and if you don't get here on time, I'm going to sit on you. Most of you were here on time. You weren't. But most of you were here on time. That's a fear appeal, right? You probably don't want to get sat on by me. So in order to avoid that, you got here on time. And so I use that sense of fear to persuade you to be here on time. And logos is the use of reasons or evidence, logic, to support one's argument. So if I say that climate change is real because 1,700 of the world's most prominent climatologists, meteorologists, and biologists or whatever, 1,700 of the world's experts say that climate change is real, versus maybe a dozen or less experts who say that it's not happening. Right? That piece of evidence is pretty powerful. 1,700 versus maybe a dozen? I'm going to probably believe the 1,700. Right? So that would be the use of logos to support one's argument. So these are persuasive appeals. So persuasion appeals that you can think about when you're giving your speech, right? So for example, when I talked about the rhetorical framing, the vision statement, and I talk about the use of adjectives in order to frame your conception of the world. Some of you, I've went around the room, or the debates I judged, I will tell you, think about the emotion behind whatever the position is. How does it make you feel? How do you think other people are going to feel? And then, if you can think about that, then you will find more descriptive words, like adjectives, to put in that statement. And the statement will then be more powerful. So in essence, then, what I'm really telling you in a kind of a very detailed way is to use pathos. Right? In the example yesterday where I said that all sports in schools should be banned, I said that it's a hyper-competitive, budget-draining activity. Well, hyper-competitive, budget-draining are adjectives, and they're supposed to appeal to you in a certain way. If I had just said, sports is something that distracts from academic learning. Okay, that's an argument, but it's not nearly as powerful as saying it's a hyper-competitive, budget-draining activity that distracts from learning, right? So that's how you can use these in your speech. Aristotle also said that an argument can be formed, and he calls this the syllogism, and the structure looks like this. Premise number 1 plus premise number 2 equals the conclusion. And here is his example. His example is Socrates is a man plus all men are mortal. And what do you think the conclusion is? Socrates is mortal, absolutely. In this particular type of argument, which is also known as a deductive argument, you may have heard of deduction and induction. Well, this is an example of deduction. And in this case, the reason why deductive arguments are so powerful is because the conclusion naturally follows from the premises. In fact, we don't need the conclusion at all because the conclusion already exists in the two premises. Because all men and men, or man, right, are the same, so they cancel each other out, which means that you're left with Socrates is mortal. Right? It's already there. Boom. Now, the problem with deductive arguments is that one of the premises could be false. What if I said are immortal? All men are immortal. Therefore, Socrates is immortal. Right? But the conclusion sounds like it's valid because the conclusion comes from the premises. But as a debater, you need to be able to recognize these kinds of arguments, because if you can identify that the second premise is faulty, then the whole argument is faulty. So you find the one weak link, point it out, and then the whole argument falls. So that's pretty powerful, right? But let's go back to mortal. And so you know what the conclusion is already. But if you're making this argument in a speech, you don't need to say the conclusion, right? I wrote that up there, and I asked you, and all of you knew what the conclusion was going to be, right? So this means that the conclusion is missing, right? I'm sorry, I know, post-lunch sleepiness. But Aristotle called this an enthymeme. And an enthymeme is a truncated syllogism. It's a shortened syllogism. It's a syllogism with one of the components missing. In this example, it happens to be the conclusion. But you could also not have a premise. You just have maybe premise one, an absent premise, and the conclusion. And then you can kind of figure out what the second premise is just by what the first premise and the conclusion say. But in this case, it's missing the conclusion. Now, why do you think people would use this kind of an argument? Why do you think someone would use an argument that's missing a component?
To make the listeners follow the logic.
Yes, exactly. Bingo. If the conclusion is missing in this case, all of you need to think about, okay, well, where is this going? And it should be simple enough that you can figure it out. So my audience knows that the conclusion is Socrates is mortal. But because you're thinking about it, you are paying attention, hopefully, and not falling asleep. Paying attention, and you're invested now in the argument, right? Because you completed the argument for me. And if you complete the argument for me, you're going to be much more likely to believe it. So it's persuasive. All right? Or can be persuasive. The other reason why we make arguments like this is because we're lazy. Right? It requires less time. About 98% of all arguments are enthymemes. All arguments you have with your parents, your friends, your teachers, all arguments that you have in debates, 98% of them are enthymemes. So, what does that mean? Oh, by the way, 98% of the arguments lawyers make, politicians make, they're enthymemes. What does that mean? It means two things that you should always, always, always remember. One is make sure that one of the premises is not faulty. Right? Because if it's faulty, then the whole argument is faulty. This is why politicians get away with so much. Because most people don't think. And they're not taught how to critically think. And they're not taught this stuff in school. Have you ever heard this stuff before? Have you ever learned this before? Yes, you have? Well, good for you, right? Most people haven't, okay? So people like politicians get away with all kinds of stuff because people don't question their arguments. They don't question if one of the premises is faulty. So that's one of the reasons why you should know this, okay? The other reason why you should know this is because it's also very powerful. And you can use it in your speeches too. Well, you do already, naturally, but you just don't know that you're doing it. Now that you know you're doing it, your arguments can be even stronger. All right? Think of something that gets your audience to supply that missing component, and then they're much more likely to be persuaded. Okay? Any questions about this stuff? No? All right, so another thing that that everybody has been doing is you have been refuting. Refuting, right? So let's talk a little bit about refuting. Refuting comes from the Latin word, I think it's refutare or something like that, which simply means to overthrow an argument. To overthrow an argument. So, one side makes an argument, hey, climate change is happening. You need to overthrow that if you're the opposing team, so you say, no, climate change is not happening. Okay? Of course, in order for it to be a real argument, you also need reasoning and evidence, right? But that's what refuting does, right? It's overthrow an argument. But there's a simple process that we can use to make sure that our refutation is strong. All right? Now I know that this is Peter's handout, and I know that he uses a little bit different language than I do, but it's essentially the same kind of thing. All right? Step 1, state the argument or the position. So, for example, in the basic income debates, in your speech you might have said, now I want to talk about the economy. That's stating a position. Okay? You're signaling, or what we call signposting. You're signposting the exact argument that you're going to be addressing. Step 2, briefly state your opponent's argument. Briefly, okay? Like within 5 seconds. Because you don't want to spend a whole lot of time on it, because then you're just giving it more legitimacy. You know, right? You're just repeating what they've said, and you don't want to do that. But you do want the judge to know that you know what you're talking about. Okay? So you briefly identify what the opponent said. Third, then state your position. Argument. On the economy debate, the government says that basic income will stimulate the economy because people will have more money to be active, and that it will generate more activity in the economy overall. My argument is that that won't happen because people will they might use their basic income check to purchase things in the economy, but the things that they will be buying will be of a higher price because basic income will cause inflation. So even if they spend more money in the economy, they're actually getting less return for their money, less value, because the prices are going to be inflated. Okay? So, state the argument position, boom, on the economy. Briefly state their position, they say they stimulate it. Boom, now state what your position is. No, basic income causes inflation. Now, if I say basic income causes inflation, what should your question be to me? Why? Exactly. So, I need to provide support. Remember the acronym for what an argument is? ARE? Assertion, reasoning, evidence. So right here is the A, and right here is the reasoning and evidence. So with 3 and 4, you are actually making your argument. Okay? Now, basic income causes inflation. And I explain why or whatever. What's the second question you should ask me? So what? So what? Who cares? Causes inflation. Hell, just about everything causes inflation these days. No? So what? How much inflation will it cause? Are we talking about, a couple yen? Or are we talking about a couple thousand yen? Right? That's a big difference. Both are inflation, but one is very, very minor. So what? So number 5, explain the importance or why you win this argument. Answer the so what question. This is particularly important in the later speeches of the debate. Particularly the last 2 rebuttals, right? You need to really explain the implication. Answer that so what question. Because you want the judge to vote for you, right? So you don't want the judge to sit back there and kind of think, well, I think this is actually more important than this, right? Because essentially what the judge is doing at that point is flipping a coin. And you don't want the judge to flip a coin. You want the judge to just automatically vote for you, right? You don't want to give the other side a 50% chance of winning. That's not very good odds, right? You want to create the reality. This is why those vision statements are so important again. But you want to create that reality for the judge that gives you a 90% or 95% chance of winning. And this is how you do it. So this is the process that you should use when refuting an argument. State the position. Briefly state their argument, then state your argument, then support it, and then answer the so what question. Make sense? All right. Don't tell Peter I'm doing this. I want everybody to stand up. Leave your stuff at your table. Let's form a circle. Form a circle. Okay? Now, this is an exercise in refutation. I'm going to start off with a claim, an assertion. Now, I'm not going to have a whole lot of evidence or anything like that, but I do need to answer a why. Okay, I need to provide some sort of a reason. Then, so I'm going to start us off. Then I'm just going to toss this ball to someone. You have to catch it, or try to catch it, and then you have to refute what I just said. Okay? So that means that you have to say what I just said, briefly, then make your claim, and then provide a reason. You don't have to do the last step, right? You don't have to explain the so what. But you do have to state my position, state your position, and provide a reason. Okay? And then you toss the ball to someone. And then they have to answer you, which means that they would be agreeing with me. But you see what I'm saying, right? So it's like pro, con, pro, con, pro, con. Until it gets kind of ridiculous, and then we'll start over. Sound good? Okay. I believe that marriage is dumb. Marriage is dumb because it's like being in a cage. You're trapped. And humans are not like animals in a zoo. Right? You should not be caged. Okay? Everyone know my argument? All right.
Freedom to choose.
Okay, start with briefly state what I said, then your claim, and then support it.
I said there is restricts freedom of people. So there is some, but we have freedom to choose to marry or not. We have freedom. It's not forced.
Okay, yeah, so all right, good. It's not forced. And you toss the ball to someone.
So
You answer her.
she stated that since we have freedom to choose marry or not, marriage is good. But I think I don't agree with her because for women especially, marriage can like can restrict women's life too much.
Good, good, excellent. Toss the ball to someone.
She stated that marriage is good because marriage is bad because women has to devote themselves to house chores, housing things. But I disagree with her because human being likes to socialize with others, and if someone has a wife or husband, they can socialize and share their emotions together.
Okay. All right. Let's choose a different topic. You choose one. How about this? Is there a social issue that you feel strongly about? Like, maybe you don't like nuclear weapons, or maybe you think the environment should be protected, or maybe you think that people should not eat meat. What do you think?
People should pay for their garbage cans.
Should pay for their garbage cans.
Because in Korea we have to buy like a vinyl.
Vinyl?
Yeah, to throw the things away. Garbage cans.
Is this for recycling, or is it just trash?
Just trash.
Okay.
So do you think?
So you have to buy it, right?
Yeah.
Okay. How is that? I'm sorry. Why is that controversial?
Like some people think that people have a right to it's just a basic thing. So the government should like.
Oh, they think that the government should buy it instead of them. Oh, okay. Okay. Thank you. Well, you have to state your claim. Yeah, and provide the reason. You can provide the reason.
Government should provide the trash can?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, trash can.
Should provide the trash can because it's government has a responsibility to meet people's like basic life standards.
Okay. Yeah, good.
She stated that government should buy a trash can because trashing thing is a basic thing in human life, so government should support that. And I refute it because when the government buys the trash can, I think people will take confidence at trashing things. So I think in nation there will be enormous amount of trash because we're going to buy the trash can. Do you understand me? Because right now, we are buying a trash can. That means we're giving taxes to the government for trashing things. And when the government buys the trash can, we don't have to pay for that. So we will trash a lot because we don't have to
Oh,
buy
I
it.
see. You conserve more when you have to pay for it, but if the government pays for it, you'll just throw away all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I understand.
She argued that people should buy their own trash can because due to the environment. However, I rebut to her argument because according to Korean Psychology Association, people are 50% happier when the government is paying for their trash can.
People do what?
Are happier.
Are happier. Oh.
She argued that government should pay for the trash can for the people because people are 50% of the nation are happy when they are supported by the government. But I disagree with her because they are supported a lot when they throw out their trashes. They will make more trashes.
Okay. I don't know why that makes them less happy or whatever, but okay. All right. But you understand the process now, right? So your opponent says something, then in order to overthrow the argument, which is what refutation means, you need to state a position and then explain why you believe that position. Okay? That's all there is to it. All right, so let me sit down, please. So now let's talk about POIs. You know what that means? What's it mean? Points of information. Points of information. Okay, first of all, what is a point of information? Does anyone know?
Asking questions.
Thank you, yes. It's asking a question. It's a fancy way of saying, ask a question. Okay? Points of information. Ask a question. All right. So, in parliamentary debate, when do these happen? When do they occur? Okay, after the first minute. Do they occur for the rest of the 6 minutes? That's right. So after the first minute and before the last minute. So the middle 5 minutes. Right? So for the first 6 speeches? Yeah. So Prime Minister, Leader of the Opposition, Deputy PM, Deputy LO, and the whips, which are all 7-minute speeches, right? Points of information do not happen in the first minute. And not during the last minute. This is why when someone is giving a speech, the judge or someone who is timing after the first minute will do this single pounding. Just one. Then when you hit the 6-minute mark of your speech, you'll hear it again. So the first one indicates that you may ask a point of information, and the second time you hear it, that means no more points of information. And then when 7 minutes is up, when your speech should be over, you'll hear 2. Okay? So, and they do not happen during the rebuttals. So only in these speeches. Okay? So that's when they happen. We know it's a question. There are a couple of things that you should know about POIs. During your speech, you're not obligated to allow any points of information. So if I'm giving my speech and one of you says, point of information, I don't have to grant you permission to ask me a question. But I should let you ask at least one, probably two, during my speech. You don't really want to allow more than two. So if a third one comes up, hey, point of information, you say, please sit down, or no thank you. Try to be polite about it. But you don't want to take more than two because you don't have time. Right? It's your speech. But you want to take at least one, maybe two, because you want to tell the judge that you know what you're talking about and that you're not afraid of questions. And then during the course of a debate, when you are sitting there listening, you should try to ask at least one point of information so that the judge knows you're paying attention and you're contributing and that you want to participate in that particular speech. Okay? My suggestion is, unless you really need to, don't ask a point of information right before your speech. Okay? Because you should be preparing, because you're about ready to speak. But if it's something that's really crucial, maybe to an argument that you know you're going to make, you may ask your partner, one of your partners, to ask, or you may ask it, but generally I would suggest that you not, because you need to prepare. Okay? Now, if you're giving a speech and someone asks a point of information, and you allow them to ask you, then you are obligated to answer. Okay, you've given them permission to ask. Now it's your responsibility to answer. My suggestion, though, is answer it in as few words as possible. Because one of the strategic uses of a point of information is to take up your speech time. So when answering, keep it really minimal. Keep it really small. The other purpose of a point of information is not just to take up your speech time, but it's also to derail you or to break you out of your rhythm. Right? If you're giving your speech and you're in a rhythm, right? And then, point of information. Okay, question. Then you ask me a question. Then I've got to get back into my rhythm after I answer it, right? And that can be distracting, right? You might lose your place, you might forget an argument, you might forget to provide support for an argument. And so that way, points of information are pretty strategic. And so if you've got an opponent who's a very good speaker and they are in a rhythm, ask a point of information. Okay? Guess which two kinds of questions in a points of information are the most useful? Why or how and so what? So, the government gets up and they're saying, we will adopt a universal basic income for all Japanese people, and which will include every single Japanese citizen. Point of information. Yes, you may ask me a question. Does that include rich people? Or why would you include rich people? Right? So that's a version of the why question. Right? Does that include rich people? I'm essentially asking, well, why? Right? Are you asking? And then later on, they might say, and a UBI will help stimulate the economy. Point of information. Yes, you may ask another question. Why is stimulating the economy important? Or just to what degree would a UBI stimulate the economy? In other words, so what? So you stimulate the economy. There are lots of things that can stimulate the economy. So ask those kinds of questions, particularly if they're not answering them in their speech, right? You want to bring those out, point out the weaknesses of their case, and that's what a POI will do. Now, you can, when answering a POI, you can answer it in a way that either supports an argument you're already making, okay, or it may allow you an opportunity to make an argument that you didn't previously think of, right? So like someone says, hey, why is stimulating the economy important? Oh, I am really glad you asked that question. Stimulating the economy is really important because if the economy is doing well, then that means the Japanese government can do a lot more with stuff, and we could solve for world peace, whatever, right? Buy trash cans. So that's what POIs do. All right. So I want to choose a motion. And I'm going to give you a minute or so to kind of think about the motion and try to think of, 3 or 4 arguments. Well, some of you are going to be government, some of you will be opposition. So like you're number 1, so you're government, you're opposition. Emma, you're government, you're opposition. Government, opposition. Government, opposition, and then you in the back, just choose one. Whichever one you like. So I'm going to give you a motion. You come up with 3 or 4 arguments. I'll give you a couple of minutes to think about it. And then I want you to stand up and tell us what those points are. You don't have to go into a lot of detail or anything, but just kind of say, I think this, and this. Try to answer the why question if you can. And then the person I pair you with, your job is to ask a POI. And then the speaker, you need to answer it. Okay? So that's going to be the exercise. All right? Okay, so let's begin with you two. All right, down here on the end. Government and opposition. And your motion is this House believes that extraterrestrials exist. All right, so you get a couple minutes. Think about it. So, Emma, you're doing this House will ban all cigarette smoking, and you're the opposition to that. You will do this House will colonize Mars. Okay, and then you will be this House would eliminate the drinking age. And in the back, the motion is this House would impeach Trump. Do you know what impeach means? It means when the Congress takes a vote. It's like a vote of no confidence in a parliamentary system. The Congress would vote and say, you've done something illegal that rises to high crimes. It's called high crimes and misdemeanors in the Constitution. You've done something illegal, so you should be thrown out of office. And the president usually would resign at that point. Doesn't have to, but usually would because of the pressure. So, do you want to be the government or the opposition? Of course. Yeah, all right. Okay, so the ET debate. You have 3 or 4 arguments now? Okay. Why don't you stand up and start giving your speech. And now opposition. I don't know your name. No. I can't hear you. Inyu? Okay, Inyu. You're not going to give a speech, but I want you to listen and at some point ask a POI. Okay? All right. So please give us a couple of your arguments.
Extraterrestrials do exist sites of extraterrestrials around the world, like sites of UFOs, which is a basic flying object for that aliens are thought to be flying in. And it is very unlikely that creatures on Earth are only live creatures that are in the universe. And there have been no scientific reports that extraterrestrials do not exist. And so many substances constitute the universe that are the substances that create living creatures. So it's very likely that living creatures do exist, like extraterrestrials do exist in the universe.
Okay, you're supposed to do a PY during the speech, not after. Okay? But, all right, you ask your question.
You said about UFO sites, and it can be evidence for its existence, but is it scientifically proof?
It is. There have been photos of aliens. There do exist the photos of UFOs and aliens, and also NASA provided some photos or information. It is known that NASA holds information of aliens or extraterrestrials. So.
Okay, good. All right. No. You don't need to give a speech. The whole point was just you, ask a. Well, no, I guess you do you have a couple of arguments for why they don't exist? Okay, then you give your arguments and then you ask a point of information. Okay? Yeah, let's do that.
First, there is no clear evidence of extraterrestrials' existence, so it is reasonable to assume that it doesn't exist because
Why is it reasonable to think that they don't exist?
because to prove something is there is no evidence of things that doesn't exist because it doesn't exist, and it's hard to prove.
It's hard to prove something that.
Yes, because it doesn't exist and no evidence and no.
Yeah.
So,
Okay. Yeah. So your answer, needs to try to be as quick as possible. It needs to be as short as possible. The answer to her question, right? It needs to be as quick as possible. Do you have another argument you want to make?
Second argument is other plants discovered until now are not suitable for living creatures. So.
Okay, good. All right. Good job. Okay, Emma, you're the government, right? For this house will ban all cigarette smoking.
First statement is about it's really to harm to their own health. Every year, too many people die by the lung cancer. And the second reason is about it can also to harm just by passive smoking. It can also to harm to the people surrounding you, and their health. And the third one is about it may make you be addicted to the cigarette, and also have some bad effect to their lives, to harm to their for example even the work ratio.
Blood pressure?
Also to harm to their work or study.
Okay. You're supposed to ask a POI during the speech.
Just because.
Like she said, her first argument is cigarette smoking causes lung cancer. You could have said, point of information, aren't there lots of things that cause lung cancer?
Yeah. I couldn't think of it.
Okay. Do you have a question now?
Cigarette, do you know there are lots of things instead of cigarette that cause cancer? So I mean, like, a cigarette is not the only one that causes cancer, and the government is not banning that. So they could. Also, the cigarette is not the only one reason cause the lung cancer, but scientifically it's really to harm to our lung.
Okay. All right. Okay, now you have some answers or some arguments for why we should not ban, right?
Yeah.
And Emma, try to ask a POI during her speech, okay?
Yeah, I think this house would not ban all cigarette smoking for three reasons. The first one is that cigarette is unlike other drugs. It doesn't cause any mental problems. Like the person who uses cigarettes has a consciousness, unlike when people drink alcohol, they lost their consciousness. So he or she can't know what he or she is doing. However, people who are using cigarette smoking have their consciousness, so there is no possibility to lose his mental. The second one is that for the people who are non-smokers but afraid of being harmed because of the smokers, there are many facilities that can avoid the smoking, and if it's too small, the government can make lots of facilities that can avoid smoking from smokers. And last of all, there are no country which is banning the cigarette smoking, and I think that proves smoking is not that dangerous and harm the citizens.
Okay. Okay.
Should I say?
You don't have to, but you should have asked it during your speech.
Maybe for first point, it said people who smoke just when they're smoking, they could reduce their stress, also feel comfort for them before. By this way, it is not equal to the
people surrounding the person, the smoker, maybe the people surrounding he or her don't really like smoke, but it's really to harm to their health.
So I imagine that the second point is that people who are afraid of the smoke from the cigarette smoking, they can be in the facilities that can avoid smoke. Like in Korea, I don't know whether it is in Japan. In Korea, there are lots of facilities. Like it is called non-smoking place. And the government can make a lot of facilities for the non-smokers. I think.
Okay, thank you. Okay, this house would colonize Mars.
This house would colonize Mars. There are two main reasons why we have to colonize Mars. The reason is that Earth is polluted enough now and the Earth lacks natural resources. So the first reason is that Mars is a good place to live.
PY?
Yes.
Do you know that Mars has many people can live on Mars and they have lots of resources? Do you know if they have resources that we could use?
So it's my second point, but to explain it about natural resources, they are the picture of a plant living in Mars was found a few years ago, and actually there is there's like plants and the evidence of water in Mars. So let's go to the point that Mars is a good place to live. Mars is very clean. Ever since people never visited there, it is less polluted, and among various planets on the solar system, it has this similar environment with Earth. And the second point is that it has many natural resources. As I explained earlier, there are evidence of plants, and the rock with a water running, like the fossil was found in Mars, so we can say that Mars have natural resources. Thank you.
All right. Okay, opposition.
Arguments that we need to colonize Mars is groundless for the following three reasons. First, it's due to the economic burden. We can use money for solving more emergent social problems, but why should we bother to colonize Mars?
Why?
Yep.
What is the urgent problems in society?
For instance, we have people sleeping in subway station. We can use money to build shelter for them, for instance. Second, it's due to lack of technology. Right now, we cannot make a spaceship that can carry such people and arrive at Mars, and we don't know if the people in the spaceship will be still alive.
Why do you think the technology lacks? Because NASA always sends people to Mars like every year.
I used to for the another planet. I thought, but isn't it? But
NASA's never sent anyone to Mars.
Right. It's far away, and we cannot survive the whole flight. And last but not least, it's due to lack of labor. We don't know if there will be people who are willing to volunteer for such dangerous colonization, and we can even lose our people when they meet ETs on Mars. We will lose.
All right, that's good. And both of you asked your PYs during the speech, so that's excellent. One thing I do want to point out, though, is that although this is an exercise for POIs, the opposition speakers should also be refuting what the PM said, right? Since we talked about refuting too, try to refute what they said as well. Okay, so this House would eliminate the drinking age.
I support the motion that this House would eliminate the drinking age for two reasons. The first reason is that all people have freedom to eat or drink what they want to. Alcohol can be unhealthy or can be harm to everyone, but why should we only limit drinking for only young people?
You know what? Why do you think we have age limits now?
Maybe because young people can suffer more by alcohol. And the second reason is that the older people can be more dangerous than younger people if they drink. Because, for example, there are many cases that old people who drink a lot kill people or steal things, but very young people.
Isn't there any some sources that young people kill after drinking?
No?
But much less than the cases of young. Old people kill many people, much more people than young people. And also, I mean very young people, young people who don't have power to kill people. So, yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Now, ideally, you should have support, right, for your arguments. And, like older people kill. All right. Okay. All right, opposition.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for your opinion. I would like to state that the opposition team would not eliminate the drinking ages because of, I think, 3 reasons. First, it is because when the youth drink, they are unable to physically and mentally develop into a healthy adult. You know why? Yes.
Is there evidence or scientific reason for that?
Of course, because their body organs are not completely grown up under age of 19. And second, because youth can't control themselves when they are drunk, opposed to what you said before. Drinking.
So why?
Yes.
Old people can old people always control their body if they are really drunk?
Not always, but the thing is that after they are drunk, they can make mistakes, both young and old. But after they make mistakes or crimes, the older ones, the adults, have the ability to compensate for the loss or damage that they caused, when youth doesn't have the ability to do what adults can do. That was my third point.
All right, good job, you two. All right. Okay, government for this House would impeach Trump. In other words, get rid of him.
Should we POI it?
I'll POI her.
The motion is that this House would impeach Trump. As a government side, I have 2 agreements about it. The first one is the qualification of a new leader. Leader should be a person who others could respect and follow.
POI.
Yes.
Didn't Donald Trump win most of the states during the election? Thereby, people had trust in him as a leader?
What I mean that respecting him and following him was like in respect of their ideals, maybe like how he thinks and how he believes.
Okay.
Yeah.
But, okay.
But as a sexist and racist, people cannot respect him in those what he believes and what he thinks and follows.
Mm.
The second reason is that he is a person who brings their own basic views of America. Even though he is a leader of United States, he is meaning the basic and fundamental idea of United States, which is freedom.
How is he reducing freedom?
Like blocking people, like even though people who have their right to live in, like who has the citizenship of America, he is blocking them to entering America just because they are from another country.
Well, yeah, Muslims are not, yeah. Well, dual citizenship. The people with visas and dual citizenship, yeah. All right, good. Excellent. So you get the idea, right? POIs can be tricky. They can be a little difficult. You never know when they're going to happen. But remember, if you're in that flow, if you're in a rhythm, you don't have to accept it. But make sure that you accept one or two, okay? There is one thing I wanted to point out before we break. A couple of you in your speeches made an argument, but you phrased it as a question. This is what I told you earlier, and in your speech, you phrased one as a question again. So, in other words, when you're giving your speech, you might say something like, why shouldn't young people be able to drink alcohol since older people can too? Well, that is a decent argument, but it could be better. It could be stronger. Because when you ask a question, you're leaving the answer up to your judge. The judge might say, no, I don't think that they should, right? And you have no control over that. You don't know what's going on in the mind of your judge or your audience, okay? So to ask a question leaves that unresolved. It leaves the answer vague and uncertain. So a much better way to say the argument is with a declarative sentence, a sentence that doesn't ask a question. In other words, instead of saying, why shouldn't young people be able to drink since adults can drink too? You should say, it is unfair that adults can drink and young people can't either. Doesn't that sound stronger? Doesn't that sound better? Okay? So try not to ask questions in your speech. I mean, obviously POIs are questions, but that's when someone else is speaking. In your speech, don't ask a question. State it as a claim, something that you believe. It's a position. You're not just asking what other people think. No, you are telling us what you think. And that makes the argument stronger. Okay? I guess I also should say, make sure you speak up, particularly you three over here. Very soft-spoken. It's kind of hard to hear you, right? And if you're being soft-spoken, it makes it kind of sound like you don't really believe what you're talking about. So you want to persuade the judge. Debate is about persuasion, right? Yeah, it's about arguments, it's about having fun and all that stuff. But ultimately, debate is about persuading someone that your arguments are better, that your arguments are strong. And if you're up here just saying, well, I really think that we should maybe explore Mars and, I don't know, get some resources out of it, or maybe extraterrestrials don't really exist and that kind of thing. I mean, who's going to believe you? But yeah, I mean, being really soft-spoken like this and monotone, you don't really change the pitch of your voice. It's like this, and maybe extraterrestrials don't really exist because I can't really prove them. I've never seen one, so they probably don't exist. I don't really think that the other team's arguments are very strong. And I mean, I'm certainly not moved by them. You can see I'm not moved by them. I'm not really moved by anything. I'm just kind of talking and filling up speech time. Is that convincing? Are you persuaded by that? No, of course not. But if you said something like, of course extraterrestrials do not exist, I've never seen one, and I really don't believe anything that I haven't seen. I don't believe there's a God. I've never seen God. I certainly don't believe there's extraterrestrials. No little green men floating around in flying saucers. Just because there are some pictures somewhere, those probably were fabricated, or there's a rational explanation. Maybe it was a flying airplane, or a helicopter, or maybe a frisbee up in the air that somebody took a picture of. But it certainly was not a flying machine being driven or flown by a little green man. Extraterrestrials do not exist. There's no evidence that they exist. I've never seen them. It doesn't make sense that they exist, and therefore I urge that you reject this motion. Now, is that persuasive? Yeah, a little more anyway, right? So, debate is about 80% psychology. The other 20% are the arguments you make, the evidence you have to support them. But it's about 80% psychology. If you walked into the room like this, what are you communicating to the judge? You're not interested. You don't want to be here. You'd rather go out in the town because you want to look good, right? Or you're checking your cow or whatever it's called in Korea, like WhatsApp. What's it called? Kakao. Yeah, right. Yeah. You're signaling. I mean, those nonverbal behaviors communicate, don't they? They send the message to the judge that you're not interested, you don't care, and then when you get up and you speak and it's like this, well, okay, that debater doesn't care, or that debater isn't really trying to persuade me, So the nonverbals that you use in your speech, like if somebody asks me a POI and I accept it, and they ask me a question, I'm probably going to say, right? I say something with my eyes. I'm sending you a message when I roll my eyes. Right? So the way you act, the passion, the charisma, the fluctuation of your voice, the emphasis you give to certain words, stating things as a declarative sentence, not a question, the nonverbals, your attitude, all of that is a persuasive message. So think about that too, okay? Any questions about anything? Yes?
While we're debating, we don't have time to research for statistics. So can we make up for it?
No, it's not ethical to make things up. In your school, if you get caught plagiarizing, what happens to you? You get a 0 on the assignment? Okay, in some schools you would get expelled, right? At my university, the first offense is generally a 0 on an assignment, but if you do it more than 2 or 3 times and you're caught, the university will kick you out. Yeah, so it's serious, right? Well, making things up in a debate is an academic violation. It's like making things up or not citing something properly in a paper. And if you're caught making things up, I know this, you're laughing, but this is serious. If you're caught making things up, the opposition or the judge could communicate that to your university and you could get in trouble. All right? So no, don't make things up. I mean, it's one thing to kind of stretch it a little bit, or to be obviously making it up so it's funny, right? Like, oh no, there's no evidence for that, right? I mean, everybody knew she was being funny with it, right? That's different. But if you're trying to be serious, right? Like if I say, there have been 68 documented cases of extraterrestrials on planet Earth, verified by independent scientists and government officials alike. There isn't. I just made that up, right? And I said that to try to win an argument, that would be unethical. Okay? Now, so what do you do if you don't have statistics? Well, you could say something like, I would venture to say that there's a very good likelihood that Mars could support life, given that we have found plant life and examples of water, which are necessary, obviously, for it to sustain human life. So it's likely that it would be a suitable place for human beings. Okay, so you're using knowledge that you know. Maybe it's not a statistic, but it's still fact. Most people know that, and you're just retrieving that and using it as support for your argument. You could, like, let's say you want to use a statistic for something, like, let's say you want to say cigarette smoking causes lung cancer in 80% of the individuals who smoke. Let's say you want to say something like that, but you don't really know that it's 80% likelihood, and you don't have a citation to back it up. So what you could say is, I believe that roughly 80% of people who smoke get lung cancer. I have read somewhere that 80%, so it's not exact, okay? But it is something that you think is reasonably accurate. Maybe it's off by 5% or something like that, but that's why you say roughly, or nearly, or approximately, or about, okay? So you have those qualifying words in there. So you're not adamantly or automatically saying, absolutely saying, yes, 80% of all people who smoke get lung. No, that's not what you're saying, right? You're saying, well, roughly or about 80% of people who smoke will at one point get lung cancer. POI, where's your evidence for that? Well, I don't know if it's exactly 80%, but I read somewhere that it's 80%, and let's say it's 70%. That's still way too many. Wouldn't you agree? Something like that. Does that make sense? Other questions?
When I get POIs and I accept it, and if the POI was related to my third argument while I'm speaking my second, can I delay it a little bit?
Yeah. You just say, I want answer to that later.
Oh, okay.
Or sometimes they will ask a question that you've already answered. You simply say, I've already answered that. Yeah, real quick, right? Don't waste any time. Now, what if they're asking a question and it's taking them forever to ask the question? Okay, you could do one of two things. Either, maybe three things. One, if you kind of know what the question's going to be, you could simply say, okay, that's fine. I know what you're saying, and then answer it. Or you could say, could you please hurry up? Just politely say, could you speed this up a bit? Or you could say, okay, I'm sorry, this is taking way too long. I am no longer going to accept your question, and move on. But the key, though, is you got to be polite. All right? Don't be a jerk about it. I have this Bulgarian friend from Bulgaria, and he does British parliamentary BP debate. And whenever someone, well, not all the time, sometimes he would accept them, but many times when somebody would say, oh, point of information, he would say, denied. Denied. And he had this, really deep Bulgarian voice, right? Denied. And I always loved it. I thought it was hilarious. But some judges think that was pretty rude, right? So
denied.
Denied. You're denied. So, yeah, something to keep in mind. All right, try to be polite.